Welcome to the Green Economy Coalition's 2021 global meeting. We have them every year, and I'm very, very excited to have the first ever online meeting. My name is Oliver Greenfield, convener of the coalition, and that means bringing people together for robust conversations about our agenda of green economy transitions. We have lots and lots of people online, so I have a brief 5-10 minutes with you, and my role is, one, to introduce you to this meeting, what it's about; two, to really give you a sense of what the GEC is and does, because I'm aware that many of you this will be your first encounter with us. Two, to really go into the agenda of the week, so you understand how this conversation will evolve, and that I can encourage you to be participating in many of the exciting sessions that we've got planned for the week. Thirdly, to really sort of give you an overview of today. And fourthly, just to introduce a little bit about what we're going to try and get out of it, I'll call the declaration. Okay, so firstly, welcome. Look, the Green Economy Coalition, I put on that first slide, Ben. The Green Economy Coalition set up about 10 years ago. Look, we grew from a general sense of feeling that unless we get serious about the economics of sustainability, we won't really ever talk the language of power. We won't ever be the top priority for governments. So whether we're not working on climate change or biodiversity loss or persistent poverty or growing inequalities, we see them as consequences of our economic system. And the only thing commensurate to the scale of the challenges that we face is a whole-scale economic reform. So we started together 10 years ago, just actually about 2009, actually, so slightly longer than that, when we saw the climate change negotiations in Copenhagen not really breaking through and making progress. There was always a bash between national economic development and international collaboration on climate. And there was always a breakdown between those. And the UN largely said we're going to push green economy as the way to break that deadlock. And we need a civil society group and a broader network of stakeholders to open up the political space on that green economy agenda. So we have been together for 10 years. So I know that most of our coalition members are on this webinar, this call for this week. But there are many of you that haven't been with Green Economy Coalition before. So we have got a number of different assets that we developed over those years, and I draw your attention to those assets, such as our barometers. We're very big on landscape, understanding the landscape, and we've got a fabulous piece coming up from Emily. We should probably brand it Emilyscapes, because she gives a scope of the picture across the piece, and our barometers are really in that space. But we've also got principles of what does a green economy look like, our shared principles that have really held us together, and we created them with others. We've also got understanding of our 5 themes of change. What does a green economy, how does it measure success? How does it move money? How does it transform sectors? How does it involve people? How does it define a new relationship with nature? And we've got that built into a tracker, a policy tracker, but we've also got a theory of change. We've got a theory of change which says we need to mobilize more and more people into this space of green economy or economic policy for sustainable development. We need to mobilize more and more people into that. They're demanding of their governments a faster, deeper, fairer transition. That's one piece of our theory of change, mobilizing more and more people. The other is transformative policy. Let's get transformative policy really central to our policymakers and make sure that we're all standing behind it collectively. So we've been together for 10 years. You can have a look at our principles, our trackers, our barometers, our website, our materials. But most importantly, that underpins everything from the coalition is the strength of our relationships with each other. This agenda is way too big for any individual organization to challenge. We work collectively, we work collaboratively. And underpinning that is the strength of our relationships, our trust, our respect, and diversity of voice. And so that's what really this whole week is about: strengthening our relationships, understanding, our collective understanding, and our collective action. So that's the GEC. I want to move on to the agenda for the week, if I may, Ben. The agenda for the week. Okay, so you'll spot that 12 till 2 GMT is our core sessions. And today is Code Red. I'll go into a little bit more detail. This is the sort of big picture piece for today, but I'll go into that a bit more detail in a moment on the agenda for the day. But tomorrow is Inequality Day. Inequality matters to us. It is the crisis that's not spoken about enough, and it sits right alongside our agenda on biodiversity, on climate, on persistent poverty, is the sense that we need this transition to be well managed. And unless people are involved in that, they don't trust their leaders because it's a too unequal society, that we won't get the sort of transition that we need. We also have Nature Day, where we will say, look, there is a gap in the agenda as we see it at the moment. Nature is not adequately addressed. We need to make sure we make the nature positive economy. So that's really that day, the first. And we've also got the media debate, a fantastic opportunity to put this recovery on trial. Is it really living up to the rhetoric? I'm very excited by that. And then on the 3rd of December, we have our Coalition Day. Really, and many of you aren't coalition members. You may want to come along and find out what it means to be a coalition. But the coalition itself, we'll use that day to deepen our collaboration and thinking. I also draw your attention to some fabulous events that are being put together by our partners. So, just this afternoon, we'll have a networking session, but then tomorrow morning, our development alternatives are leading a conversation about small green enterprises. We will be networking again on Tuesday afternoon. Our colleagues from the GGGI and Vivid Economics will talk about greening of the stimulus index. We will have a session on Stories for Life, one of my favorites, how to tell the narrative. This is ultimately a culture change program. And we will have a fossil fuel link from IISD, one of our first partners that joined, and then also talking about COVID declaration. So you can see a richness of agenda items, and hopefully you've got all the Zoom links you want to get involved in that. But our core sessions start today. Code Red. Let's go on to the next slide then. Code Red for today. What we're going to do, I'm the intro. Look, we're going to go straight after me to an icebreaker. As I said, the most important thing about our coalition is the strength of our relationships. We know each other and trust each other and have frank and open conversations. So we're going to have a quick introduction, and you're going to be able to introduce yourself. We're going to put you in breakout groups. Again, the theme of this is not just people talking at you. We want to encourage you to talk to each other and to us. So let's just we will have a quick icebreaker, and we'll answer one question: who you are and what gives you hope. So 2 questions, sorry. Then we're going to go, I'm going to hear a few people. I'm going to bring in a few people from, first of all, I'll bring in the European Commission, slight amendment to the agenda. Then we'll hear from Emily, who will give us that landscape across the piece. What's the world post-COP? Chris will take us from COP towards green recovery and some of the thinking we've been doing collectively, where we're up to on that. We'll hear from Kumi, one of our great friends and special advisors, Kumi Naidu, and he'll give us a sense of his life's experience on activism and this moment and what this moment demands. We're going to just go around the room a little bit, bring in some of our coalition members and just get some reflections, just to warm up the discussion. But then we're going to go into breakout groups. And really, that's the point of this, is to hear from you, to collect your insights into this moment and make sure that we're capturing it. We're going to use things like Jamboards. I'm going to introduce that in a minute. Look, you may not be comfortable with Jamboards. It's just a big whiteboard and you post notes on it. You may not be comfortable with that. If you ever have any problems with the links, just chat to Ben or put your comments in the chat. Just use the chat. We're going to be collecting the chat and monitoring the chat. Feedback, discussion. And by the end of the day, next slide, Ben. By the end of the day, we should be really moving towards a declaration. Why do we do these global meetings? We do them for three main reasons. To bond the group, to really deepen the relationships that underpins all of our action. Secondly, we revise and refresh our strategy. What are the things that we are going to be working on, collaborating on? It's an invitation to collaborate. And thirdly, we like something that hits the moment. What is this moment? What are we saying now into this moment? And that we have this zero draft declaration that we've already created via some consultation with our coalition members. We offer it up for improvement. That'll be a theme that runs across the week. How do we improve this? How do we make a joint statement as of this moment? And so that's what we will be doing. Okay, I think that's largely my intro, but this is an invitation for long-term collaboration, but it's a short-term opportunity to engage with us around the declaration and this COVID recovery moment. I am very, very aware that not everybody it can say that COVID we're all recovering. We are still in the midst of this. And personally, I am in a lockdown because my family being diagnosed with it this weekend. And I've got a house full of teenagers where I was hoping they wouldn't be here so that my bandwidth wouldn't be at risk. So I'm also very worried about that. But I know that recovery is very different across the world. We have to be very cognizant of people who are really in quite dire straits. So, when recovery starts to take hold, we need this agenda to be clear, that governments have real clarity from us. What should they be doing? What do we demand of them to be doing? No governments can spend twice on both recovery and also changing our economies. Let's make it once, and let's make it clear, and let's start this transition to accelerate now. So there is the moment. This is the agenda. We're delighted that you're with us. And with no further ado, I would like to stop talking and make the most important point that we're going to put you in an Icebreaker breakout group just for a couple of minutes. It's 5 minutes. Just really quickly introduce yourself. What gives you hope? Let's take people to, if you can accept the breakout group note that will come up next. I hope, if our tech is working, it will allow you to switch over and meet some people. This is what, when you look at agendas, it's always meeting people in the fringe that really makes these events exciting. So thank you again for being with us this week. It's a fabulous opportunity to explore relationships and to build forward together. Let's now give the opportunity, if we may, to go to breakout groups. I hope that was a just nice, quick snapshot introduction to people, getting a sense of where we're at and who you're in a meeting with. It's just to start the sense that this is not a talk at you, it is a talk with you, and that we hope that your brains and mouths are starting to, so we're ready for some deeper breakout groups later on in the session. I'm going to bring in Bernard Krabbe from the European Commission, because just a very brief introduction. When lots of people are talking about policy, we know that the European Commission and the European Green Deal is one of the most transformative systemic pieces of economic policy, but so is their international policy as well. And we're delighted to say that when lots of governments invest in top-down policy processes, the European Commission knows that this has got to be rooted in community as much as it's got to be rooted in policy. And as soon as we get a people's movement for this, then it will go to scale. And they've invested in us from pretty much the beginning. And we are delighted to have them as a partner on this journey with us. And representing them is Bernard Krabbe here today. So thank you very much for joining us, Bernard. Over to you.
Thanks to you, and good afternoon to all. I'm very delighted to be with you. And let me briefly indeed update you on what has changed on our side over the last 18 months. And indeed, a lot of water has flown under the bridges over the last year and a half, and sometimes, unfortunately, also over bridges, particularly in my country, Belgium, and in Germany. And people are still struggling to recover from these hard events. Well, first of all, I would highlight that on our side, we have some new faces, and I should quickly mention Aline Brandstatter, who is the officer in charge of this cooperation with the Green Economy Coalition in the European Commission. So she's an important person. And also Tibor, who is the colleague who has taken over the Green Economy file overall on our side. So I think it was important to introduce them. Second one, well, of course, the COVID has shaken us a lot, all of us, and we are starting to realize how much it has reverted a lot of progress against the SDGs. Some of these hardly won gains that we had achieved over the last decade or so are really undermined by this. it has also shaken our economies, obviously, and shown how our economies and value chains are vulnerable to this kind of shocks. So we definitely need more resilient, more green, more circular economies. That's obvious. On the policy side, well, at some point we thought that the Green Deal might be the European Green Deal, which is very much the flagship policy of this Commission and that you have mentioned, was possibly threatened by the COVID crisis. Luckily, very early on in the crisis, our President von der Leyen, said very clearly, no, the Green Deal is our compass for the post-COVID recovery. And I think it's important, it's very much in line with the agenda of this meeting of this week. And indeed, over the last 18 months, we have been working hard in all corners of the Commission to roll out the Green Deal agenda. It's really an all-encompassing agenda that touches all the sectors of EU action. To give some examples, so after the adoption of the European Green Deal policy, we have worked notably on a climate law, putting into law our climate commitment. We have adopted what we call a Fit for 55 package. It's the whole set of measures that will allow the Commission, hopefully, to achieve this commitment to reduce emission by 55% by 2030. We have also adopted a new circular economy action plan that is highly relevant for the work of the Green Economy Coalition, we believe. A new industrial strategy, an action plan on pollution also that we call the Zero Pollution Action Plan, and under which we recently, the Commission recently proposed a new waste shipment regulation for the EU. I will not mention all of them in the interest of time, but so a lot of work, including as well on sustainable finance, that I should mention. The whole work, the sustainable finance agenda, is trying to shift financial flows towards sustainability, with a taxonomy, with a number of standards on green bonds and similar measures. So, just to name a few of the measures that we have adopted over the last 18 months. On the programming side, also importantly, well, you may know that the Commission and the EU works on 7 years cycles. So we have a new multi-annual financial framework for the next 7 years, including a new external financing instrument that we call Global Europe. And that has 89 billion euro allocation for this period from 2021 to 2027. This instrument will shape our cooperation with partner countries over the next 7 years. It's a very important one, obviously. We will apply very strongly what we call a geographization principle and a subsidiarity principle. So everything that can be done at country level shall be done at country level through our country programs. The new program also includes a very strong focus on investments, and that also very closely links to your work. So, what are the implications for all these events for our work, and why the Green Economy Coalition matters to us? I think that's important. Well, first, practically, the implication of this new programming exercise is that we really encourage you to link in your respective country with our EU delegations. So to link the work you are doing at country level with the cooperation we have at country level with partner countries, because the bulk of our action will take place at that level. I think that's important. Second one, obviously, we need to rethink our economic models. That's obvious. We need to think out of the box. And I think we need you, first of all, to challenge our thinking and to really bring new ideas to the table. That's an essential role, I believe, of the Green Economy Coalition. Second point, and I think very happy to see it prominently in your agenda, we need a greener economy, but also a fairer economy, our core mandates remains the reduction of poverty as international cooperation. So we welcome your focus on inequalities. That's really at the heart of the priorities of the commissioner in charge of international partnership. There will be obviously no green transformation if this transformation is not just and inclusive. I think the EU has very clearly realized that as well. Third point, and I see it also in your mandate and in your agenda, the importance of coalition building, as you mentioned. This broad, overwhelming agenda indeed will require all actors to work together. And we don't see that happening for the moment. We see these crises, these shocks dividing our society. So there is a big risk of that. And I think your emphasis on building coalitions is very much welcome. Then obviously we need watchdogs to hold us accountable on our commitments and to maintain pressure. I think you have mentioned on your website, evidence shows that 2/3 of the countries for the moment are not, the recovery agenda are not green. So they are not sticking to their commitment for a green recovery. So I think you need to maintain the pressure. Our Vice President of the Commission, Mr. Timmermans, was once questioned by the young activists on climate, asking them, are we not, they were asking him, are we not annoying you with our movement? And he replied very clearly, no, I need you to promote this agenda internally because there is a lot of resistance. So maintaining the pressure on our commitments and maintaining the pressure so we maintain this ambition of the Green Deal is essential for us. And I think the same is valid for our partner countries. And finally, also I would say particularly this is true on the whole agenda on finance and investments. The EU and others are really scaling up the use of international cooperation to promote investments and to leverage public and private investments. We definitely need to watch this closely to make sure that this investment agenda is in line with sustainability principles. And this will require a lot of vigilance from both from us, but also from your side. And finally, also referring to the agenda of this week, I'm very happy that you have put nature on the agenda of the week. Indeed, climate, biodiversity, pollution, this is all closely intertwined. We should avoid silo thinking. The Green Deal, I think, is a good representation of this holistic agenda. Everything is interlinked. Food systems, biodiversity, climate change, circular economy. These are all different phases of the same fight. I think Vice President Timmermans said that very clearly in an article in The Guardian 2 weeks ago. The nature and climate agenda needs to go hand in hand, and nature is key to achieve climate neutrality. So we need you finally to support us in maintaining a very high level of ambition for COP15 on biodiversity this year that will take place in China. The EU has great ambition for this event. We need all actors of society to really maintain pressure to reach an ambitious post-2020 agenda on biodiversity. So for all those reasons, your work matters, and the agenda of this week is highly relevant. So thank you, Bernard, for letting me speak, and wish you a fruitful discussion.
Thank you so much, Bernard. Very, very kind of you to join us. Thank you very much. I'm going to go straight to Emily now on what is her specialty, the landscape. Emily, over to you.
Okay, so firstly, thank you so much and welcome everybody. What a privilege it is to be with you here today. I have to say, I miss being with you in real life, waving across a conference room, catching up over a lukewarm cup of coffee. But I'm also so pleased to share this virtual space with you all, to feel connected. That feels more important than ever. So nearly to date, it's 2 years since the first outbreak of COVID. What has that meant for the great global economic transition? Are the wheels of economic reform still turning? Let's just first remind ourselves what we mean by a green economy. Contrary to the name, it's so much more for us than wind turbines or solar panels. It's about integrated action across 5 different areas: measuring and governing, reforming finance, greening sectors, tackling inequality, and valuing nature. A green and fair economic transition contains all of those actions. Before I go into the reform agenda, I just want to obviously go to the big picture. COVID has changed our landscape. Between 143 and 163 million new poor people are joining the ranks of the 1.3 billion people already living in multidimensional and persistent poverty. Secondly, far from being a sort of great equalizer, COVID-19 has compounded existing inequalities across wealth, across race, across gender, across age, education, geographical location. And vaccine inequality is widening that gap and prolonging the suffering of the virus. And finally, the IPCC report, the latest one that came out over the summer, just reminds us that we are indeed in code red. So that's the big picture. Now, let's go into the reform agenda. Let's look at the last 18 months in particular, and we'll start with sectors because that's where most people start when they think of a green economy. So what did we see at COP? Well, we saw finally to the G20 have agreed to stop financing international coal, 40 countries committing to phasing out, despite India's attempt to slightly shift the text. We have, in fact, seen a 76% reduction in proposed coal power since COP15, since the Paris Agreement in 2015. So that transition is happening. We saw a new declaration on electric vehicles, rich countries to phase out by 2035. We saw carbon markets, new rules for carbon markets agreed at COP26, particularly around the Article 6. And that means that we will avoid double counting and ultimately hoping to clear a pathway to get private capital flowing to developing countries. And finally, an agreement on methane. But let's be clear, the current NDCs are still not enough to keep within a 1.5 world. Small enterprises are struggling to benefit from that green economic sector reform, and biodiversity is still often absent in sector decisions. Okay, now we're going to go across to valuing nature. So the big announcement at COP was the Glasgow leaders' declaration on forest use and land use, ushered in by the UK, signed by over 100 world leaders, including some of the biggest forest countries, Brazil, Canada, DRC, Colombia, Indonesia, an agreement to halt and reverse forest loss. But the big question is, the devil is in the detail. How do we hold that to account? It did not come in under the official negotiations, so that requires enforcement mechanisms, it requires reforestation strategies, funding, nature-based solutions attracting new investment. So about 133 billion going to natural-based solutions, but largely most of that's coming from the public sector. More countries are accounting for their natural capital. So that's all good news. However, the lows, nature is still facing a 4.1 trillion financing gap by 2050. COVID recovery plans are still failing to mention nature. And environmental governance has been suffering through COVID. On to inequality. So some highs, the G20 endorsed a global minimum tax on big business. That means that a corporate tax rate of 15% to be imposed by 2023. Secondly, historic special drawing rights allocation by the IMF of about 660 billion, but a question as to whether it will reach the poorest countries. The lows. The EU and the US blocked loss and damage at COP26. So that means the world's most vulnerable countries are still not eligible legally to receive significant funds as a result of what is happening to climate change. Over half of the world have no income security from their national and social protection systems. And micro and small enterprises, women, marginalized communities, informal sectors have been hit the hardest again by both climate change and COVID. Reforming finance. How are we on finance? Well, the big news at COP was the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, the big Mark Carney initiative. And that accounts for 130 trillion of assets are now committed to the transition. That's 40% of global assets. For a sense of scale, global GDP last year was 85 trillion. We're talking about 130 trillion. So not insignificant. We've also seen some good big strides in categorizing for the capital markets what a green investment is through green taxonomies in EU, Russia, UK. Also, the UK was the first to make it mandatory for companies to publish net zero transition plans. And that's going to be overseen by an independent task force. So some movement there. But just to be clear, wealthy economies have still not met the 100 billion in climate finance that were promised to the world's poorest countries, and at the same time have spent 14.4 trillion on unsustainable COVID recovery. The majority of global emissions are still unpriced, and green taxonomies are blind to biodiversity. Measuring and governing. In good news, the US is back in the frame. Unexpectedly, US and China announced a new collaboration on climate change at COP26, and the EU Green Deal remains one of the most ambitious sector reform strategies. Secondly, the ratchet mechanism at Paris did survive, and that's not to be shunned. ESG is increasing. By 2025, 1/3 of 140 trillion under total assets will be accounted for through ESG, and we had a strengthening of financial disclosure. But in the lows, the CBD was delayed and still lacks political clout. More lobbyists linked to major oil and gas companies than were at COP than in fact any single delegation. And GDP still reigns as the most important metric of progress. So what does all this mean? It means, yes, the wheels of green economic reform are still turning, but not fast enough. Unless we fight for it, unless we fight for it, the current trajectory will compound inequality rather than deal with it. So the recovery is only just beginning. And with that, I'm going to pass to Chris, who will share his reflections on the COVID recovery agenda.
Thanks, Emily. I'm Chris Hopkins. I'm Policy Manager with the Green Economy Coalition. I'm just going to bring up my slides and talk a little bit about what we've been doing tracking the green recovery and the forward agenda for that. So I'm going to be assuming these are going to come up, and I'm going to be waiting for anything from my colleagues if you can't see them in a moment. Hopefully we're all good. I'm looking for some faces and I'm seeing some nodding. Great. So we at the Green Economy Coalition, we've been tracking the green recovery for getting on for a year and a half. We tried to get in really early on this agenda, and to see a lot more about what Emily's just been speaking about, you can go and look at our Green Economy Tracker, which you can see the link for on the right, and we'll be able to put stuff in the chat. We've been monitoring transitions all around the world, and I've got to give you a really tight summary of what we found. And the short version is governments have been investing big post-COVID You can see some of the figures here on the left from McKinsey. They're out of date, but they give you an illustration of the scale. You can see there in dark blue what Germany invested after the financial crisis and what it's now invested after the COVID crisis, similar for Japan, for France, for some of these other large economies. Now, that is not all green. So 2 things to say. It is very variable, the extent to which that investment has been green. We've seen some countries doing really well. You've got France in there, Costa Rica, Sweden, South Korea, who have had green recovery packages of various kinds. And they've tried to make them inclusive. They've tried to do the right things. There's lots of climate in there. Even with those good, bright spots, and the tracker will give you more information on this, there's not nature in there. We want to see much, much more nature. What we've also seen is countries who've done this large investment. You can see Brazil on there. They haven't prioritized green recovery at all. It's not much green spending when they're thinking about post-COVID. The same for the US, the same for Australia, the same for China. And that's largely a political question. They've just not really prioritized it in how they've been spending the money. The difference we've seen is in the global south, you've got a similarly lack of green focus, but that's just about fiscal space. That's just about financing. There's been lots of interest in the green agenda, but people haven't been meeting their commitments to climate finance, to send money south, to meet the commitments that have already been made so that those transitions can be funded. And the thing to say also, secondly, is all of that money that I've been talking about, you can see those large blobs there, it's been spent during the early phases. So if you look at the left of the slide here, phases of COVID economic response and the policy response, the OECD, other organizations think about the policy response in terms of phases. You initially want to stabilize, you want to think about how you can support your health systems. Then when you're thinking about lockdowns and other measures that impact your economy, you want to stimulate it, you want to fill the gap, and you want to do lots of spending. That's what governments have been focusing on so far. What they haven't focused on is on structural reform and on the green recovery. That's the phase that we're now moving into next, and what we think is really, really important. So how can you build green structural reform, and why is it important? We've got this moment as governments are starting to move from stimulus to green recovery. And we've seen with Omicron, we've seen with COVID that you can move back through phases as well as forward. But right now, we think there is this moment. And it's really important that the recovery is green, because you, as Oliver said at the start, you don't want to pay twice. You haven't got the money to reconfigure your economy for COVID and then do it again for the green economy. You haven't got the money for that. And we definitely don't have the time for that. So you've got to do it in one go. You've got to integrate these things together. And that's what we've been trying to work on this year with this group of people called Partners for Inclusive Green Economy. It's the GEC, along with lots of these different agencies that work on inclusive green recovery, inclusive green economy, green growth all around the world. And what we've built is we built a tentative menu of what a green structural recovery might look like. You can see it here on the right. There's lots of stuff that's in there. What measures can really cut across and can provide investment for 5 years, for 10 years. They're not just little things that work now to stimulate. It's a new agenda for 10 years. And you've got measures in there, some of which Emily was speaking about: green fiscal reform, green monetary tools, green regulation, natural capital investment, big things, fossil fuel funding moratoriums, no more funding going to fossil fuels. And that's what we're trying to pick up and emphasize with the Green Economy Coalition. We have a paper which we've just written, which was at the OECD Green Growth and Sustainable Development Forum. There's a link which we'll put in the chat afterwards, but you'll be able to find it, setting a structural agenda for green economic recovery. And this is what we're trying to build and promote as a coalition. But we don't just need technocratic solutions. We need credible economics, and we need a movement that can deliver it, that can make it actually happen. So we need this table. We also need slogans that can be chanted, that can be taken to the street. So if you wanted a shorter version of this, invest in nature, invest in green infrastructure, invest in green skills, reconfigure green finance, reshape a just transition, reshape beyond GDP and how you're targeting your economy, end fossil fuel investment, end fossil fuel subsidies, end the exploitation of nature, and build a social contract that's fit for the 21st century, an eco-social contract that brings all of this richness together into one package that sets the obligations between a state and citizens and a citizens and state, and can really deliver a green economic transition. And that's what we're trying to build this week. Oliver spoke about it a little bit at the start, a green COVID recovery declaration we want to bring from us as the coalition and from all of you guys who are participating to the world. what does a green COVID recovery look like and what do we need? We're going to be sharing some links to it in the chat. It's going to evolve over the course of the week based on what the feedback we get. We've already heard some feedback. I heard it in the breakout that we had, the really short icebreaker on what people want to see. But we're trying to focus on why it's urgent now that we have a green recovery, what we can do together as a civil society movement, and what we demand from governments. So hopefully you're going to engage with us in this. There'll be sessions to talk about it a bit more, but it'll be really, really great to see your engagement in what a green COVID recovery can look like, and a call to action, which we'll build at the end of the week that goes forward from it. So thank you very much. I'm going to pass back to Oliver to take us on to the next session.
Great stuff. So that's open all week, that declaration, links to it, make your comments, and ultimately, you've got to signal whether or not you want to sign up, you want to sign it, you want to use it, and you want to brand it, you want to be part of our advocacy to push it into the right spaces with the right amount of power. The stronger we are together, that's effectively coalition's mandate. Okay, I'm exceptionally excited to bring in Kumi, our very best friend from Lessons from Activism, lessons from your life of activism, Kumi, and this moment, and what we need to do to step forward. If you could warm us up, that would be really exciting. Over to you.
Thank you, Oliver. Greeting, friends and colleagues. I must start by saying that following that wonderfully rich presentations that we've just heard, I'm tempted to start the way we did during the liberation struggle in South Africa. If you followed a set of presentations that you started by saying, most of the really good points I wanted to make have been eloquently made by the previous speakers. And then you said, however, for emphasis, and you spoke for about 1.5 hours. So I've got 10 minutes, so let me get going. The reality is, dear friends and colleagues, is that we find ourselves in the most consequential decade in humanity's history. What we choose to do and what we succeed in changing over the next 10 years will determine what kind of future we will have, or in fact, whether our children and their children will have a future at all. In framing my comments, I'd like to start by reminding ourselves with what Albert Einstein once said, when he said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting to get different results. And in that context, I want to share with you the very uncharacteristic difference I had with Mary Robinson a few months after the COVID had locked us down, when we were on a panel together, and she said, I am pretty certain that it will not be like how it was after the global financial crisis, where governments simply went back to business as usual. And I said, Mary, I so want you to be right, but actually I think right now, given the balance of forces, they will likely go back to essentially business as usual. Because what was needed in 2008, 2009 at the end of the financial crisis, and what is needed urgently right now is system innovation, system transformation, and system redesign. But what we got in 2008, 2009, and what we are likely to get unless we mobilize significant public pressure, is we will get again system recovery, system protection, and system maintenance. And it is clear that right now, that where the science and the extreme weather events are, and where the politics and the economics is very, very far apart in practice. Okay, I want to make this distinction. In practice, in real terms, in implementation terms, they're very far apart. But actually, in narrative terms, in language terms, and so on, the gap might appear to be much smaller. Let me give you an example. At COP26, again, instead of saying scrap fossil fuel subsidies, the dominant nations of the world managed to get the language in scrap inefficient fossil fuel subsidies. Just that insertion of that one word means that nothing happens, as nothing has happened since they made a commitment at the G20 in 2009. So if you reflect on the G20 outcomes, the COP outcomes, I would say this person on Twitter, Nathan Tanki, put it quite well when, I'm not sure whether it's a he or she, but when it was said, it's not that COP26 outcomes are good, but that they have been better, but could have been better. It's that they are very bad, but could have been worse. Okay? And I think when we talk about code red and use that language of urgency on the one hand, and then when we look at where we exactly are, there is a extremely huge divide. Now, when we talk about the critical need for a social contract, I think it's quite important that firstly we should say, because I think right now in the current COVID moment, there are some people who say, oh my God, the social contract is broken. And sometimes the way it gets articulated is as if the social contract just got broken recently. I think it's important to remind ourselves that the social contract has always been broken for indigenous peoples, for women, for young people, for older people, for people in the global south, and so on. So in fact, this therefore challenges us to have a level of imagination of what might be possible way beyond simply going back and looking at what was the best moments of social contract practice. Then the other thing that we must also be mindful of, it's not as if the social contract is not working. It's not as if the financial system is not working. It's not as if the energy system is not working. Many will say, actually, they are working in the way that they were designed to work. Okay? So this blockage that we got has not happened by accident, it has happened by design. And therefore, to reverse it, it requires maximum levels of innovation, creativity, and design thinking on the part of those that seek to reverse the trajectory that we are on. But I want to conclude my remarks by focusing specifically on what activism needs to do and what activism needs to change. Because it is not good enough for the activist community to say that it cannot be business as usual, it cannot be government as usual, and think that we continue to operate as we've operated in the past. Because had we been as successful as we needed to be, we would not be in as deep a crisis as we are now. And I would humbly say that this is a time of great humility for deep reflection in terms of what we need to change. So very quickly, I think the one thing that we need to look at is our gaze, right? What I mean by that is far too often activism's energy is looking at those with power, appealing to them, begging them, urging them to do the right thing. And I believe that 95% of the time, they know what we are to say to them. We know how they're going to respond. And we've got into a ritualistic dance. And we have made the mistake of confusing access to power for influence over power. And therefore, I think we need to redirect our gaze more strongly to the people who are most directly affected by the various failures of leadership, and to enable that creativity, energy, and power of ordinary people to be harnessed to the extent that it becomes irresistible for those in power not to listen to it. It is much easier to those in power to resist and ignore the words of well-meaning advocates. It is much harder to get those in power to completely reject the power of an organized, informed, committed citizenry. The second thing is we need to rethink how we talk about the moment that we're in. It's true that things are really bad. In Afrikaans, you would say, in my country, you would say, ons is deep, deep, deep in the kak. And I'm sure that probably does not need translation, right? But this moment has to be a moment where leadership inspires confidence and hope, right? Because on the one hand, yes, inequality is, COVID has made worse. We are on the cliff of climate and much worse, right? But on the other hand, when I talk to people who've been around for a long time, the main positive message I get is people saying, I don't remember a moment in my activism or in my work that the possibility of big structural and systemic change is as high as it is now. And we need to recognize that we have in this crisis a major opportunity to push things forward. But to be able to do that, we cannot focus only on how people are exploited, excluded, marginalized, oppressed, repressed, and so on, important though a starting point that might be. Because sometimes when we don't proportionately focus on the capabilities that people still have, the agency that people still have, notwithstanding all that they have been on the receiving end of, then we actually do not have the capability to mobilize the kind of power that we need to mobilize. So I would argue that there are many powerful capabilities that people have, even in the finance space, even as consumers, as creative generators of creative content, and as holders of autonomy by being citizens and agents in public life. Then the other thing that I think civil society needs to do is we need to change our language, and our language needs to become much more accessible and people-friendly, and we need to figure out how do we take this conversation about social contract, for example, and frame it in a way that it's not a term that just doesn't resonate with people. It needs to be something where we need a set of communication interventions here that are actually much more, accessible to people. And therefore, I think the idea, for example, of the jury trial on Thursday on the Green Recovery on Trial is the kind of creative methodologies, even in our internal practice, that we might be wanting to put more energy on. And I'll urge you all to attend that because it'd be a learning experience for all of us. So finally, just to say the obvious, which Oliver has stressed, the need for intersectionality. I think that we have to do this together. We need to build coalitions and alliances on a scale that we haven't done before. But I still would like to end on this note, that nature does not negotiate. We cannot change the science. All we can change is political will. And thankfully, in most of our societies, political will is a renewable resource. Thank you very much, Oliver. Sorry if I took too much time.
You were spot on, Kumi, and activism has got to change. No business as usual, but no activism as usual. Connecting our gaze to people, making sure that we are enabling their power to be an irresistible force for policy. And it's absolutely building coalitions to do that. A theory of change built around people in empowerment with the right arguments and the right activism is absolutely what we're about. So thank you for coming to that conclusion, and thank you for joining us today. It's absolutely spot on and brilliant. Okay, so look, we do need to make sure we give enough time for you guys, all our participants, to join in the conversation. But first, I want to give a very strong flavor that this is not just this is a coalition, a global coalition that has got people in lots of different places around the world who are experiencing very different situations and contexts and challenges and change. So let's just do a quick round the world to some of our long-standing coalition colleagues and get a little bit of just a couple of questions. What's the last 18 months? What's happened a little bit top, and then their top intervention. That question, that second question, the top intervention, will be the question that we will be asking you in a breakout group as soon as we've been around the world. So very quick snap interventions. I'm going to first call in one of our best friends from the Caribbean, Nicole Leotard from the Canary. Nicole, are you there? Are you ready to go?
Yes, Oliver, and welcome to everyone, and thank you very much for having me. Nicole Leotard from the Caribbean Natural Resources Institute. And I was asked to reflect on what's changed. First, well, what's not changed is the Caribbean is still in the middle of the crisis, where some of the northern countries are talking about moving on and the next phase. We are still not there, very much in the middle of the crisis, and really not seeing any discussion at all of structural reform or transformation. That's not where we are. I think what's changed for me, shockingly, and really links to Kumi's points, is less open governance, where we're seeing COVID-19 recovery decisions being made with very little consultation and not effectively engaging all sectors of society in this social contract that has really collapsed almost. Civil society organizations are hurting. They've lost their financing. They cannot operate with all the restrictions. And so they are silent. And that very important activism, watchdog role, advocacy is just not happening. Citizens, I think, are quite traumatized, almost in a state of ongoing shock and really unable to engage and think strategically about development. Many basic government services and policy making are just not functioning, offices are closed and so on. So even the basics that we should be doing, consultation and policy is not happening. And private sector associations and civil society networks are also weakened as individuals just turn to their own survival. So we're really not seeing strategic leadership and ideas in that social contract. And so therefore, in my mind, the single most important intervention we can make, 100% endorse what's said before in terms of this whole of society approach to recovery. We must see structural reform for more participatory, bottom-up, decentralized economic decision-making, including in the development and monitoring of COVID-19 recovery, but also more broadly. I feel there's huge potential. We talked about coalition building for more collaboration and partnerships, both at the national level across sectors, as well as at the regional level, especially in the small island developing states and less developed country context. We need to work together and collaborate to see where we can share knowledge and collaborate on joint actions. So I really think we need to think of the roles of all these sectors of society, private sector, civil society, social movements. How do we capture the voices of the most vulnerable and marginalized at different stages? We must have input into the decisions, and knowledge and perspectives are tremendous. We must encourage innovation, especially in the private sector, of course, to come up with solutions. Delivery of solutions. Civil society has a huge role to play in delivering solutions and reaching the most marginalized, and monitoring and holding governments and others to account. So I think echoing what others have said, thank you very much, Oliver.
Thanks, Nicole. Fabulous. Look, I'm going to go straight to Jeremy Fossey from Eco Union.
Yes, hi everyone, and it's very pleased to see all my colleagues and friends from all over the world. So very quickly, because I think then we have space for discussions, I really believe that from the civil society, what we need to know is what's happening from in the corridors of the policymakers. It means that the transparency and the sharing of information and knowledge is key for us to be able to monitor and to track and to see the differences between what is being said with what is being done on the field. And this is, I think, something that could really leverage the green recovery. And as it was mentioned before, we need to find a space to interact formally or informally with policymakers and with decision makers so that we can really have a chance to push for more progressive and inclusive green economy policies. So again, I think tracking, monitoring, and complaining when needed to the policymakers, either at national level, local level, or global level, is a key element for us to move forward a green economy in the coming decade. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. And very quick and precise to the point. I want to bring in Martin Locke now from one of our coalition, Capitals Coalition, a great partner with us. And Martin, maybe a reflection on from you. What's changed? What needs to happen? Top intervention.
Hello, Oliver. Thank you for having me, and good afternoon to all of you, or good morning, good evening, depending where you are. First, starting positively, what it has changed over the last 18 months. And all my reflections, by the way, are coming from 2 government dialogues that we have organized around COVID recovery as Capitals Coalition. So some countries really are doing a good job to use this crisis to create change in their economic and development policies. So I've learned, for example, from Indonesia, how they are doing this in the context of their national economic recovery program. They talked about this in one of the discussions that we organized. And they showed us how they are using several support programs for sectors, SMEs, and local communities. That really is helpful. Also, another continent in Africa, the Uganda government is trying to use the statistics that they have, for example, around forced resources to inform COVID recovery policies that are necessary right now in the midst of this crisis. At the same time, there's also a more negative side. So one of the presentations that was held at our dialogues was by the Dutch Environmental Policy Agency, PBL, as part of a WAVES program discussion that they organized in September. And what they showed is that the majority of COVID recovery programs is not really tackling the environmental and the people issues. So the majority of the stimulus packages aim at an immediate rescue. So that's also what we saw in Indonesia, providing support for sectors, for people, for companies. But they tend to reinforce negative environmental trends. And personally, I'm quite, I think that probably is the same for people and the negative people trends that are there. There are only a few interests directly in natural capital and in people capital, according to this PBL study. So going to the question, what single intervention is needed? It is to intervene not only for short-term solutions, but for structural change. And this has been talked before by several of the speakers. To be honest, I don't think a single intervention there will do the job. So I will aim for 2. One is we need to include the impacts and dependencies on nature and people into all decision making. Not only to look back and to understand where we have gotten to so far, but especially also to shape future decisions. This was one of the elements in the PBL study, where they said the majority of the statistics is not used to shape future decisions. It's used to understand where we are right now, which is not good enough, I think. The second one is we have to rethink and repurpose incentive mechanisms. The majority of the current incentive mechanisms are rewarding nature negative and people negative outcomes. And that's, of course, not helping us. So only if we repurpose current incentive mechanisms in the fields of agriculture, in the fields of jobs, in the fields of the energy, we will able to change the course of the earth and help COVID recovery. Thank you, Oliver. Back to you.
Thank you, Martin. Great insights there. Structural again comes up, and specific ideas on those structural policies. So let's go to Hazel Henderson over in the stateside. Hazel, long-term friend of the coalition, ethical markets, the perspective of finance. You've been around this agenda for a very, very long time. Fabulous to have you with us. Give us your insights if you can.
Thank you, Oliver. Thank you. And I just want to apologize to Kumi for misspelling his name. I was complimenting him on his wonderful statement and his tenacity all these years. So what we do at Ethical Markets, which is basically run by me and funded by me and by my book royalties and TV royalties, so we don't take advertising or anything like that. And what we have been pushing since 2004 is the politicization that we have to do. We have to engage in the politics of money creation and credit allocation. My methods are always to go to the top of the food chain where the rules are made And if you mess around halfway down the food chain, you make things awfully difficult. So our approach has been confronting financial people directly and working with our friends at Positive Money in London and Brussels, who are confronting the Bank of England and confronting the ECB. And what I mean is that we have to tell the truth, that there is no shortage of money. All the rich countries create their own currencies out of thin air through their central banks, and there's no reason at all why we couldn't do green QE to fulfill our obligations for the 100 billion that has been promised since 2015 to help developing countries to overcome the problems we created for them. There is no reason why the IMF, which under Kristalina Georgieva, the way she handled putting out funds for COVID, she got criticized tremendously. You know, like the Economist magazine suggested she had to be fired because she gave direct grants to all of these countries for COVID. And we can do exactly the same. We can have a new issue of special drawing rights, green special drawing rights, that can be used to directly accelerate the green transition in all the developing countries. So that's been my message all over any time I get a chance is please, let's forget the fear of finance. Let's confront finance and get them to admit that they create the money out of thin air.
Yeah.
And so Greta Thunberg says it best. She says, why do we keep allowing these debates over the fairy tales of GDP growth? I mean, let's tell the truth. Thanks so much, Oliver.
Thank you, Hazel. Look, we know your expertise on the finance world, and so the sense of the money cannot be an excuse. There is enough money there if we demand it be invested. And thank you very much for that very clear intervention. Let's see if, I'm not sure if Elise is back, so probably I'll get a message on that, but let's go, if not, to Mirko. Mirko from Seed, the small business perspective. Mirko, are you able to come in?
Thanks, Oliver. So yeah, very pleased to be here and also for sharing our kind of basically three insights. I think over the last 18 months, I think we saw a kind of call for green SMEs, a call for impact, and a call for scale. On the kind of call for kind of green SMEs, we saw really as part of a lot of kind of green recovery programs, many of them who are also kind of green economy coalition partners put really green SMEs in the forefront. And we from Seed see this clearly happening. We see also a lot of kind of green SMEs which could demonstrate over the past 18 months that they were resilient to COVID and could kind of really contribute to kind of green recovery at large. But we also saw that obviously with this kind of new spotlight on kind of green SMEs, that there is a much bigger kind of call for impact of this kind of green SMEs. And we see that we all need to go the kind of extra mile also to kind of simplify actually existing impact measurement frameworks and methodologies to also better measure and demonstrate what is actually this kind of contribution of kind of green SMEs. And similar to what kind of also Kumi Naidu and I think you, Oliver, mentioned, is that we see a call for scale, that we all need to kind of think bigger, because we also all understand in order to scale this kind of contribution from green SMEs, we need kind of bigger kind of coalitions, bigger partnerships, which actually put at a much kind of bigger scale green SMEs at the forefront. I mean, everybody of you who was at COP, the green SMEs are not there. These are the kind of ones which are providing the solutions, but we actually need to go the extra mile to also put them in front of kind of policymakers at bigger conferences and coalitions. So thanks also for this opportunity to share.
Thank you, Mirko. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we've been around the world. We've heard from Kumi, we've heard from the European Commission, we've heard from the Coalition Secretariat on some of the big picture and on on some of the structural changes that are necessary. We've heard from Nicole on the need for participatory processes, from Hazel on finance, from Mirko on absolutely the small businesses are largely ignored. Look, we've heard social contract fraying, the need to talk to people. Look, we've heard a lot of interventions, and you can already see that there is a lot of ideas of what are the priorities for this moment. So we are now going to stop talking at you and ask you to start thinking and contributing to what you think are the top interventions. So it's just a single question. You're going to enter a breakout group. What are the top intervention for this COVID recovery moment? What is it from your side, that top intervention? Look, I am aware that not all of you will be comfortable with Jamboards. As I said, it's just a whiteboard and a post-it note. We're just trying to capture as much thinking as we can. All the Jamboard links are in the group, in the chat now. You will be allocated to a particular group. So group 1 to 5, 5 the Jamboard, group 6 to 10, find the Jamboard, group to 11 to 15 Jamboard. Just the reason of that is that so that we can have one Jamboard per group so that it doesn't get too confusing. So you will be allocated to a group. You've got just about half an hour, running a little bit behind, but I'll probably shave it off the next steps piece. We want to hear from you. And if you can't get onto a Jamboard, just use the chat. Use the chat and put your thoughts in there. But we want to try and capture this. We want to try and distill it down and put it into the declaration and start to improve it from the collective wisdom of this fabulous group that have come together in this meeting. So with that, I believe, was I needing to put a slide up on Jamboards or are we just going straight to it? I think we're going straight to it.
Just to intervene, I'm just going to, everyone just pause just for 2 seconds, just whilst we finalise something so we can put you into the breakout rooms. I'll just give you a nod. So if you just give me 2 seconds, thank you.
Sure, lovely, thank you for that. And by the way, the tech's going beautifully. We've been around the world with hardly any notice, so it's been fabulous so far. And here is the slide on the Jamboard. So look, you just click on the link that's in the chat to find the right Jamboard that's relevant to you, your group's Jamboard, just so that we keep an awareness of who's in which group and who said what as much as we possibly can. And it's just a bunch of sticky notes. Just click on where you see a sticky note and you write in it and you post it, and that's it. And you can, over the week, we'll get more sophisticated with Jamboard. So there are specific sections and places you can put them to emphasize a particular point, whether or not it's structural or it's stimulating. But at the moment, this is just capturing one thing, one question. What are the key interventions for scaling a green, fair COVID recovery? So I'm hoping that I'm going to get a thumbs up whilst all our participants are being allocated to breakout groups. This is your opportunity to add your thinking into our collective thinking. And we hope that you have a rich and vibrant conversation. By take 1 or 2 minutes, to explain your intervention. But if you don't have to listen to everyone else, if you just somebody going on a bit, do your own intervention, write it on the post-it note and just post it there. Just get as many down as possible as we can. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, breakout groups are always a challenge to find the Jamboard, to find your comments. Look, I encourage you now, from what you've heard, to post in the chat your top comment. Really make sure that in case we've lost things from not being able to use Jamboards, let's just post in the chat now what you think your top intervention is. And please be reassured that we're not going to lose any of this. This is all going to be synthesized by our group here, really getting a sense of pulling this all together, making sure that it's captured, and make sure that it all feeds into the declaration, but it also feeds into our broader thinking. So I encourage everybody who's not yet introduced themselves or not yet spoken or is feeling, did everyone listen to me in our breakout group, just to go your name and your top intervention, and we'll capture it there. We are going to start I'm just going to draw in Najma. for a sense of, Najma, what did you hear in your session? We're not going to go around all the different breakout groups because I think that's death by breakout group feedback. We're going to capture it via either the chat or via the Jamboards as we read it overnight. So Najma, I believe I'm going to bring you in, and you're just going to give me a little bit of a sense of what you've heard.
So, yeah, I mean, truly a global discussion, I must say. We weren't in the 6-7 of us who were in the breakout room. We were all from 6-7 different places in the world. And so it was amazing to see the convergence around some of the recommendations. There was a strong cluster around who is part of the policy-making process, making sure that we have inclusive, multi-stakeholder policy processes, getting young people and women in government, a focus on the vulnerable and on children, which I thought was, an area that we haven't really looked at concretely. I think there was a strong theme emerging around jobs, which is unsurprisingly given the impact of COVID across the world in different types of economies, different geographies. We are all struggling with the knock that our economy and employment has taken. So a strong focus on jobs and on real green solutions and jobs involving, again, multi-stakeholder processes. So the multi-stakeholder came out as a strong theme. A really wonderful recommendation around the importance of recognizing that civil society have got that reach to last mile communities and how essential they've been to actually be that link between governments and some of the most remote and worst impacted communities. And then I think a very strong recommendation both on investment and divestment. So investing in the right kinds of things, investing with the right types of frameworks, but also divesting from fossil fuels, from the arms industry, so that we can get money to where it really matters. And I think, Oliver, that captures, the broad themes from the group. Was incredible to see the convergence within the group.
Thank you very much, Najma. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, I encourage you again to keep posting in the chat if you want to add something else in. But a very, very strong theme is emerging across the conversations, certainly from the group Najma's just talked about and some of the chat here, and also from us, is that sense of participation, local leadership, local champions, local decision making, really making sure that last mile, that integration, that understanding and empowerment is such a key part of our coalition work. And it's a real stretch. It's really very, very difficult to do. It's an acknowledgement of that, but also an acknowledgement that solutions that come from communities are much more likely to continue than those that just happen at a very high level. If it means a change to people's lives, it impacts people's lives, then it's rooted in community, it's more likely to grow. So very, very consistent theme across that, the participatory processes around that, hearing voice, but also hearing solutions and actions of those local communities, and building from that. Very much a forgotten agenda is around the small business. We heard that from Mirko right up front, but we've also heard it across the conversations here today. We are seeing the importance of finance, value creation, but also divestment. That argument that's coming out again. You can't just build a green economy if you keep investing in the brown economy. Where is that divestment, and where is the comparable investment? There is some people that are clearly new to this agenda, so we're very grateful they're here on the idea of what is green in the first place. So, I think that whole idea, which we start to see in the policy space of taxonomies, but we also go beyond taxonomies and talk about a green economy more broadly, and some of the structural changes that are necessary. I do recommend that you have a look at some of the assets that we're producing on structural work. Really sort of breaks it down into that idea of invest in R&D, invest in finance reform, invest in key sectors, start to build some infrastructure around this green economy transition, ensure that it is participatory, ensure that it is inclusive. and ultimately define better metrics for us to understand economic progress, which includes social and environmental goals. So some really, really strong conversations. Our lead on the declaration is Chris, and he's got his work cut out to make sure all of these comments we've either got in Jamboards or we've got in the chat find their way into the revision of the declaration. Look, this declaration is an invitation for a statement from our organizations, and we do run the highest common denominator is that not everybody can sign everything, and everybody's sign-up processes with different organizations are very difficult. If this general statement is approved and agreed by coalition members, it can be branded GEC, but we would like it to go beyond that. We would like you also to be part of that declaration and to add your signatories to it. So we offer it there. It will be improved over the process of the week on each of the events. With that, I think that it's probably sensible for me to now move to starting to get to next steps of what happens. I'd like Ben to help me by putting up the agenda again for the week. And I can explain to you how we build from today towards the rest of the week and the other sessions that we will do. Okay, so that's that one there. Okay, lovely. Thank you, Ben. Okay, so today we've done code red. We've set a picture. We've set a picture of what's happening in the world. Where is the recovery? Is there a recovery? Is there a rhetoric? Is it matched by real action, real policy action? And if not, what are we going to do about that in the short term, the interventions that we talked about in our declaration? We also want to build an agenda for the long-term transformation. And the idea that we have identified that inequality is the unspoken crisis that needs to be central to the transition. If you don't trust your government because they're making things unfair, then you are unlikely to trust them on the transformative policies that lead to this green and fair transition. So how are we going to address inequality? How are we going to explore the opportunity of more participation? That's the theme for tomorrow. And we have an idea and a proposition for you around social contract. We are also going to ensure that we pick the other invisible part of this. Where is nature in this? What does a nature positive agenda look like in an economic reform? That's the 1st of December. And the media debate on bringing this green recovery on trial, as Kumi said, in an innovative way of really reaching new audiences and engaging them on coming to a conclusion. Are politicians speaking and not acting, or is their actions matching their words? And then Member Day. Around that, we have some really fabulous opportunities from our partners. So I emphasize tomorrow at 10 o'clock GMT, development alternatives on some of our hubs, putting that idea of small businesses being the champions of this transition, being the champions of making sure that we are on the track. How is their access to finance critical? We see all this money that Hazel was talking about, but yeah, there may not be a shortage of money, but there's certainly a shortage of money in the right places. How do we make sure it lands into those small business investments? So the small business could be the entrepreneurs of this green transition. We've also got the GGGI Vivid Index, Green Stimulus Index on Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock. Find out what Vivid and Vivid Economics and GGGI have said about the stimulus index, where has it got to? Then the other sort of external one as well is Stories for Life, one of Emily's programs of work with some real partners. We all has come up a number of times. So that's a partnership with Wellbeing Economics Allowance, really recognizing this is a transition of culture change, underpins policy change. What are we doing about culture? How are we actually reaching out to new people and new audiences? So come along to Stories for Life. In the meantime, this afternoon, for anybody that wants to just have an informal session, come and meet some coalition members, come and meet some people. We've got networking this afternoon at 3 o'clock. Very informal, just chat and meet. I have to emphasize, for us, the coalition works because of the strength of our relationships. And that's exactly what these networking events do. Find the innovation that happens when you meet one-to-one with people and have a deeper chat about who you are, where you're coming from, and what does it mean. So that's largely our agenda. I think that I'm looking at my time. I think I'm actually ahead of time, which was extraordinary, seeing as at one point we were a little bit ahead. Emily, I just look at you. I know I wasn't bringing you in, but have I missed anything really critical?
No, I think that's great, Oliver. Just to emphasize the networking sessions, that really is an opportunity to meet a bit more informally and to catch up, as Oliver mentioned. The strength of our network is not just one big lump, but it's all the connections between ourselves, between the different organizations and members. And I know that some of you are new to the coalition and new to how we work. So I'd really encourage you to join any of the networking sessions that you can see from the agenda. But I think that's everything from us as of today. What we'll be doing now is collating what we've seen from the JAM boards to try and make sense for the declaration. What are the key strands that are coming through? That process will come to an end as of Thursday afternoon. So we'll be sort of consolidating across the week for the declaration, and then hoping to finalize it as of Thursday afternoon. So would really welcome your interventions by then, and as Oliver mentioned, the opportunity to know who's happy to sign up for that. Okay, so back to you, Oliver.
Thank you. So everybody should have emails with all the links for all the different sessions. If you do have any questions about how to get on sessions, or you're not registered or you're not linked, just find Ben's email, which should be in your inbox, and send him an email, and he shall help you get to the right place. But the Zoom links are all there for everybody. Okay, so with that, we've started this week. We really encourage you to join us for Inequality Day, for Nature Day, and for all the other sessions that particularly get your interest. We hope that you're with us, but it is a very, very warm thank you for being with us, at least for this hour. And we hope to see you at the next sessions, even this afternoon at 3 o'clock, if you can sit back and enjoy some networking. So with that, I love it when we finish on time, which is what my clock is just about to do. So with that, a well-managed team. Thank you. Great job, team. We got through everybody's contributions. Thank you so much for the contributions. Kumi, as always, Bernard, brilliant, and all of our coalition members from around the world. We hope to see you in an hour's time. And with that, I wish you a farewell until later. See you soon. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.